Today we begin a series of sermons on investing for long-term gain. We've taken from material from the book Treasury Principle by Randy Alcorn. And before each sermon, I've asked one of the men of our church to come and share a testimony of one who is seeking to practice what I'm preaching. So Randy Freeman is going to come and share a testimony about investing for long-term gain this morning.
All right, just a brief history lesson. So in 2009, I graduated law school. Life was great, except for there was just a few problems. Number one, it was 2009, so we're in the middle of what's known as the Great Recession. Number two, we're the proud owners of a house we bought at the top of the housing market in 2006. And number three, I have no job prospects. So I'm in Durham, I have a wife and a child, and wow, what are we going to do? I passed, graduated law school in May, passed the bar that fall, and things didn't look great. Where are we going to go from here? But God had a plan. So working backwards, I actually got my first job interview when a friend who worked for Mercedes-Benz roadside went and changed a flat tire. It just so happened that the person he met on the side of the road today was an attorney in Raleigh. Said, hey, I got a friend. You should give him a call. I got a job interview. I got hired. Now, to some people that may be a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. It's a God thing. And ever since then, he's provided an opportunity to move back home. The job I have now, I would have never known about it. I wasn't looking online for potential jobs. My former boss said, hey, I think this would be a great opportunity for you. You should check it out. It's a grant position, but I took a leap of faith. God's kept that position open for 2 years now. We're still going. So he's provided all the way through. It took a little while for the housing market to recover, but it did. God kept us a tenant in there. We actually sold the house in 2012, but lost no money. And we're back here. Things are going great. And that's not to say that there's not going to be ups and downs. It's not. Even I've got most of Brent Nash's surgeries paid off for having their tonsils and adenoids removed last year. The day he gets out of school, he breaks his arm. There's a couple $1,000 right there. But guess what? We got some good news this year. He was got a 80% teaching position, pretty hard to come by. So she now has her own retirement insurance. I'd have to come out of my pocket every month. So God's provided. He has all the way through. As I said, it's not going to be all smooth sailing. There are going to be ups and downs, but he's provided for us. And the 10% that we give every month, that's the least of it. We've never missed it. We've never regretted it. So I would encourage you to, if you're not, try God. He'll come through for you.
Laney, thank you. The principle that Laney has learned and has applied in his own life is found among the many scriptures, one of which is Matthew 6. Would you turn that with me, please, to Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 20. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 20. And as you're able, will you join me in standing to honor the reading of God's Word? Do not store for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. Please be seated. Picture a first century Jewish person. He's walking along on a hot afternoon. A staff is in his hand. He's come a long way. His shoulders are stooped. His sandals are covered with dirt. His tunic is stained with sweat. But he does not stop to rest because he has pressing business in the city. He veers off the road into a field seeking a shortcut. The owner will not mind because in that day travelers were permitted that courtesy. But the field he's taking the shortcut through is uneven. To keep his balance, he thrusts his staff, like a shepherd's staff, into the dirt. And when he does that, bonk, the staff strikes something hard. He stops, he wipes his brow, and he pokes again. And again, bonk. Something is under there, and it's not a rock. The weary traveler tells himself that he cannot afford just to stay there and linger on, but his curiosity will not let him go. So he jabs at the ground again and again, and something reflects a sliver of sunlight. He drops to his knees and he starts digging. 5 minutes later, he has uncovered it. It's a case that is fringed in gold. By the looks of it, it's been there for several decades. So his heart is racing, and as his heart is racing, he pries off the rusty lock and he opens the lid. And what he finds are gold coins and jewelry, precious stones of every color you can imagine. This is a treasure more valuable than anything he has ever seen or even imagined. So his hands are shaking, and as his hands shake, he is inspecting the coins, and he finds they were issued by Rome over 70 years ago. Some wealthy man must have buried this case of treasures and died suddenly, and the secret of the treasure's location evidently died with him. And he looks around, and there's no house nearby, there's no homestead nearby, so surely the current landowner doesn't have a clue that the treasure is there on that land. The traveler closes the lid, he buries the chest back where he found it, but he marks the spot. He turns around and heading home, he's skipping like a little boy, smiling broadly. What an unbelievable find. He's saying, I've got to have this treasure, but I cannot just take it because that would be stealing. But how can I afford to buy it? So he thinks, well, I'll sell my farm and my crops and all my tools, and I'll even sell my prize oxen. And if I sell everything I have, that ought to be enough to buy this field. From the moment of his discovery, this traveler's life changes. This treasure captures his imagination. It becomes the stuff of his dreams. It is his new reference point. It's his new center of gravity. This very story is captured by Jesus in Matthew 13:44, when Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. This parable is one of many references that Jesus makes in the Gospels about money and possessions. In fact, 15% of everything Jesus said in the Gospel relates to money and possessions. In fact, he speaks more about money and possessions than he does about heaven and hell combined. Well, why did Jesus put such an emphasis on money and possessions? Because there's a fundamental connection between our spiritual lives and our giving. Giving is a tough subject. Giving and money causes difficulties between people. One man said to his pastor, my wife divorced me for religious reasons. The pastor said, oh, I didn't know that was possible. He said, yes, she worshiped money and I did not have any. Well, sometimes money also gets in the way of relationships. Of course, part of the problem is that money actually does talk. It says, goodbye. One guy said he lost his money in the bear market and the bull market, and he did not have enough money left for the flea market. Another person said he invested in revolving doors and paper towels. Before he could turn around, he was wiped out. And often people are out to get your money. Even on Christian television and radio shows, they talk a lot about money. They say that God will give back to you if you give them money. You give them $100, and they may claim that God will give you back $1,000. Let me suggest you try something the next time you hear that kind of appeal. Call that ministry and tell them to send you the $100 and let God give them the $1,000 and see what they say. See, raising money can cause anxiety. A rookie policeman was asked what he would do to break up a rebellious, angry crowd, and he said he would just take up a collection. That ought to do it. In Matthew 6, Jesus teaches us two principles on investing for long-term gain that are consistent with his parable about the hidden treasure. The first principle is, you cannot take it with you. Look at verse 19 in our text for today. Jesus said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Why not? Because treasures on earth are bad? No, but because they will not last. Proverbs 23 verse 5 says concerning wealth, when you set your eyes on it, it is gone. For wealth certainly makes itself wings like an eagle that flies toward the heavens. Next time you buy a prized possession, imagine it has sprouting wings and flies off. Because sooner or later, that's exactly what is going to happen. Sooner or later, it will disappear. Wealth will always be lost. Either it leaves us while we live, or we leave it when we die. No exceptions. Imagine you are alive and it's toward the end of the Civil War. It's winding down. You're living in the South, but you're a Northerner. You plan to move home as soon as the war's over. While in the South, you have accumulated a lot of Confederate money. You know for a fact that the North is going to end the war, and he's going to win the war, and the end of the war is imminent. So what are you going to do with your Confederate money? Well, the smart answer would be to immediately cash in your Confederate money for U.S. currency, because the only money that's going to have value once the war is over is U.S. currency. Keep enough Confederate currency to meet your short-term needs only. See, as a Christian, you and I have inside knowledge of an eventual worldwide upheaval that is going to be caused by the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. That, brothers and sisters, is the ultimate insider trading tip. Earth's currency is going to become worthless when Jesus returns, or when you and I die, whichever comes first. Investment experts known as market timers, they read signs, they claim to know when the stock market is going to take off or when it's going to go south, when it's about to take a downturn. So then they will recommend to their investors that they think the market's going down, they'll recommend to their investors that they take their money from stocks, take it out of stocks and put it into money market vehicles or CDs. Well, Jesus functions as the foremost market timer. He tells us once and for all to switch our investment vehicles. He instructs us in our text here in Matthew 6 to transfer our funds from earth, which is volatile and which is ready to take a permanent dive, and transfer our funds to heaven, which is totally dependable and which is insured by God Himself and which is coming soon to forever replace this earth's economy. Now, when you look at Jesus' financial forecast for this earth, it is bleak. But He is unreservedly bullish about investing in heaven, where every market indicator is eternally positive. There's nothing wrong with earthly money as long as we understand its limits. Realizing that its value is temporary should radically affect your investment strategy and my investment strategy. To accumulate vast earthly treasures that we cannot possibly hold on to for long is about the same thing and is equivalent to stockpiling Confederate money, even though you know it is about to become worthless. So the first principle Jesus teaches in our text is that you cannot take it with you. Now the second investment principle he teaches in this text is even though you cannot take it with you, you can send it on ahead. Look at verse 20. Jesus does not just tell us where not to put our treasures. He also gives us the best investment advice we could ever receive, and that is store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Now, Jesus is not against us storing up treasures for ourselves. In fact, he's all for it. He even commands for us to store up treasures. He's just telling us here to stop storing them in the wrong place and start storing them in the right place. Jesus says, store up for whom? For yourselves. Now, would not that be selfish? No. God wants you and me to live to His glory, but what is to His glory is always for our good. As John Piper says, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. See, selfishness is when we pursue gain at the expense of other people. But God does not have a limited number of treasures to distribute. So when you store up treasures in heaven, it does not reduce the amount of treasures that are available for other people. In fact, it is by serving God and serving others that we store up heavenly treasures. In that way, everyone gains and no one loses. Jesus is talking here about a principle of maturity that is called deferred gratification. Now, children are not able to defer gratification. They want something, they want it now. But a mature person learns to defer gratification. The man who finds a treasure in the field, he pays a high price now by giving up all he has, but soon he's going to gain a fabulous treasure. And as long as his eyes are on that treasure, he makes those short-term sacrifices with joy. The joy is present. So even the gratification is not entirely deferred. Present joy comes from anticipating future joy. So just what are these treasures in heaven that Jesus is talking about here? Well, they include power and possessions and pleasures. Jesus promises that those of us who sacrifice on earth will receive 100 times as much in heaven. Now, when you figure out the rate of gain, that is a 10,000% gain. That is quite an impressive return. Of course, Jesus Christ Himself is our ultimate treasure. All else pales in comparison to Him and the joy of knowing Him. So a person, Jesus, is our greatest treasure. A place, heaven, is our second pleasure, our second treasure. And possessions in the form of eternal rewards are our third treasure. So the questions that you and I need to ask ourselves are, what person am I living for? What place am I living for? And what possession am I living for? Jesus says, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Why? Because it is right. Yes, it is right, but not just that. But because it is smart. Because such treasures will last. Jesus here is arguing from the bottom line. This is not an emotional appeal He's making. It's a logical appeal. Jesus is telling us to invest in what what has lasting value. You and I will never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. We will never see that. Why? Because you cannot take it with you. Psalm 49, 16 and 17 says, "Do not be afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house is increased, for when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not descend after him." At one time, John D. Rockefeller was one of the wealthiest individuals who ever lived. After he died, someone talked to his accountant and asked his accountant, "Hey, how much money did John D. leave?" And the reply of the accountant was a classic one. The accountant said, "He left all of it." You cannot take it with you. But Jesus says, by storing up treasures for yourself in heaven, you can send it on ahead. It's that simple. Anything that you and I try to hold on to here and hang on to here will be lost one day. But anything we put into God's hands will be ours for eternity. Wow. And what we put into God's hands is insured for infinitely more than the $100,000 of insurance by the FDIC. When we put money into God's hands, it is insured by the real FDIC, which is the Father's Deposit Insurance Corporation. If we give instead of keep, if we invest in the eternal instead of the temporal, then we are storing up treasures for ourselves in heaven that will never, ever stop paying dividends. Whatever treasures we store up on this earth will be left behind when we leave. Whatever treasures we're storing up in heaven will be waiting on us when we arrive. Financial planners tell us, when it comes to your money, do not think just of 3 months ahead or even 3 years ahead. If possible, think about 30 years ahead. Well, Jesus, who is the ultimate investment counselor, he takes it much further than that. Basically, Jesus is saying, do not ask how your investment will be paying off in just 30 years. Ask how it will be paying off in 30 million years. Well, suppose you were offered $1,000 today and you could spend it however you want to. Not a bad deal. But suppose this person who offered you $1,000, he says, I'll give you $10 million if you wait 5 years from now. Only an absolute fool would take the $1,000 today. Yet that is exactly what you and I are doing whenever we grab onto something that will last only for the moment and forego something far more valuable that we could enjoy much, much longer. The money that God entrusts to you and to me on this earth is eternal investment capital. Every day we have the opportunity to buy more shares in God's kingdom. You cannot take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. Now that's a revolutionary concept to most people. And if you embrace it, I guarantee you, on the authority of God's Word, that it will change your life. As you store up heavenly treasures, you will gain an everlasting version of what this man found in the treasure that he found in the field, and that is joy. When you trust God with your finances, you are exposing your finances to the supernatural. it doesn't make mathematical sense, but I can just tell you from personal experience, Lanny will tell you the same thing, and others in this congregation who know what it is to tithe will say the same thing. It's amazing how that when you learn to give God what He requires, and that is a minimum of 10% of your income, and giving to Him and His work, that the 90% that is left will go farther in paying your bills than the 100% that you would have kept for yourself. Doesn't make mathematical sense, but I can promise you, I've experienced that, and many of you, all of you who tithe, you know what I'm talking about. It makes no sense that someone who cannot pay his bills on 100% of his salary would be able to pay his bills on 90%. Now, rationally, that just does not make sense. But it also makes no sense that God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son that you and I should have eternal life. Why would He love us so much? You and I cannot begin to comprehend God's love. Many people say today that when they get it together, they will start to give the way the Lord wants them to. You see, giving is God's way to get it together. He will bless us while we get it together. There is no good time to start giving the way the Lord wants us to. Remember the song, "You picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille"? But when is a good time to leave? There is never a good time to leave. Be not afraid is one of the most common and explicit commands in the New Testament. Don't be afraid to give. Take a step of faith. When you go to the ocean, you see two kinds of people. They're the ones who just run right in. The water's cold, and they just run right in. The cold water's a shock to them, but they adjust, and they get comfortable. And then they relax and they enjoy the water. And then there are others of us who we just kind of inch in. We spend forever trying not to get wet. We're not in or we're not out, we're just miserable. People on the shore are happier than those who are trying to inch into the water. Those people are double-minded. They're not trusting, they're just waiting. That's the way it is with giving. Inching yourself in doesn't cut it with God. He expects us to be immediately obedient to Him once we have learned what He wants us to do. For instance, those of you who are married, especially you men, how many of you waited until you could afford it to get married? Love says to make a commitment, and then you figure out how to pay for it. Right, guys? Well, with God, love causes us to make a commitment. Then we figure out how to pay. And you know what? It works. Why? Because God will help us work it out. So this one big decision makes the rest a lot easier. When we give in obedience to the Lord, you and I experience a joy that is indescribable, and we really live an abundant life that we never knew before. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for this treasure principle. That we cannot take it with us, but we can send it on ahead. Thank you, Father. In Jesus' name. Amen. For some of you here today, the first step you need to take in obedience to the Lord is to invest your life with the Lord. To give yourself wholly and completely to Him. Realize that you're a sinner and you cannot save yourself. Realize that good works won't get you to heaven, but instead, if you would trust in